They sold her like livestock because they believed she was worth nothing. In 1885, a California town watched as a 55-year-old woman named Martha Cole stood on an auction block, humiliated by her own family. The crowd laughed. They mocked. They called her useless. But one broken rancher saw something different. What happened next didn't just save her life. It changed everything either of them thought possible about love, dignity, and second chances. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey reaches. The dust rose in slow, choking clouds across the town square of Bitter Springs, California. It was the kind of dust that settled into your lungs and stayed there, thick with drought and desperation. The year was 1885, and the drought had been strangling the valley for 3 seasons now. Wells ran dry. Cattle died standing up. Men grew mean with worry, and women grew silent with exhaustion. In the center of the square, beneath a sun that showed no mercy, they had erected a wooden platform. It wasn't much, just rough planks hammered together by hands that had built it too many times before. This was where they sold things when money ran out and pride ran dry. Farm equipment, livestock, furniture from houses that had gone empty. Today they were selling Martha Cole. She stood on that platform with her chin lifted, though everything inside her wanted to crumble. 55 years old, with silver threading through brown hair that she'd pinned back with shaking hands that morning. Her dress was clean, but worn thin in places, mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible beneath the patches. Her hands, calloused, strong hands that had worked every day of her adult life, were clasped in front of her, knuckles white, with the effort of holding herself together. The crowd gathered, not a large one. Bitter Springs had never been a large town, and the drought had made it smaller. But enough. Enough faces to form a wall of judgment, enough voices to create a chorus of cruelty. "Look at her," someone muttered, loud enough to carry. "Old as dirt and twice as dry." Laughter rippled through the gathering. Martha kept her eyes fixed on the distant hills, those brown slopes that used to be green before the sky forgot how to rain. She wouldn't give them her tears. She'd given them everything else. 30 years of cooking and cleaning and caring for her brother's family after his wife died. 30 years of raising children who weren't hers, of keeping a house that would never belong to her, of being useful until the exact moment she became inconvenient. Her nephew Thomas stood beside the platform, his face red with something that might have been shame but looked more like irritation. He was 28, soft around the middle despite the hard times, with the kind of weak chin that benefited from the beard he'd grown. His wife Eleanor stood behind him, her pretty face arranged in an expression of pious concern that fooled absolutely no one who knew her. "Now, folks," Thomas called out, his voice carrying across the square with practiced ease. "I know this ain't pleasant. Lord knows it pains me to stand here, but times being what they are," he spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness that made Martha's stomach turn. "A man's got to think of his own family first, his wife and children." "Get on with it," someone shouted. "Ain't got all day." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Aunt Martha here has been a blessing to our household for many years. Good woman, hard worker, but she's getting on in years and we just can't—" He paused, manufactured a crack in his voice. "We can't afford to keep her anymore, not with the drought, not with prices what they are." "So you're selling her?" This voice came from old Mrs. Henshaw, who ran the boarding house on 3rd Street. There was disgust in her tone. "Selling your own blood?" "Not selling," Thomas protested, though his eyes slid away from Mrs. Henshaw's glare. "Offering an opportunity for someone who needs household help. She'll work for room and board, that's all. Just needs a place to land is all." "That's selling," Mrs. Henshaw said flatly. Eleanor stepped forward then, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. "Now, Mrs. Henshaw, we're trying to do right by Martha. She's been a wonderful help, truly, but she's slowing down, missing things when she cleans, forgetting recipes she's made 100 times. It wouldn't be Christian to keep her on when she can't pull her weight, would it? We'd just be enabling her decline." The words landed like stones. Martha felt each one, felt the way they painted her as feeble, failing, finished. She wanted to scream that she'd never missed a thing, that the only recipe she'd forgotten was one Eleanor had made up last week just to catch her out. She wanted to tell them all that she'd raised Thomas from the time he was 8 years old, that she'd sat up nights when he had the fever, that she'd taught him to read when his father was too drunk and his mother was too dead. But what would be the point? They'd already decided who she was, what she was worth. "Let's start the bidding at $20, Thomas announced. 6 months of domestic service, cooking, cleaning, mending. She's got good hands still, and she knows her way around a kitchen." Silence greeted this pronouncement. $20 was more than most men in Bitter Springs had seen in one place for months. For 6 months of labor from a woman they'd already decided was used up, the economics didn't make sense, and everyone knew it. 10, Thomas amended quickly, desperation creeping into his voice. $10 for 6 months. More silence. Someone coughed. A horse stamped and blew air through its nostrils. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Martha felt the heat of shame crawling up her neck. This was worse than she'd imagined. She'd known Thomas was planning to be rid of her. Eleanor had made that clear enough over the past months with her pointed comments and deliberate exclusions. But Martha had thought there would at least be the pretense of dignity. A quiet arrangement with another family. A placement as a housekeeper somewhere respectable. Not this. Not a public auction like she was a plow horse that had gone lame. $5, Thomas said, and now the desperation was naked in his voice. $5 for 3 months. That's a bargain, folks. You all know she can work. Can she, though? This came from Jacob Winters, who owned the feed store and fancied himself a wit. I mean, look at her. She's older than my mother was when she died, and my mother couldn't hardly get out of bed those last years. Martha's strong, Thomas insisted, but his conviction was crumbling. She's got plenty of good years left. Then why are you selling her? Someone called out. Thomas's face went scarlet. I told you, it's not selling, it's pathetic is what it is. The voice came from the edge of the crowd, and heads turned to locate the speaker. Martha turned too, though she told herself not to look, not to care. A man stood there, lean and weathered, with dark hair going gray at the temples. He wore dusty work clothes and a hat that had seen better years. His face was hard-lined, carved by sun and wind and something else. Something that looked like old grief, the kind that had settled into the bones and made a permanent home there. She didn't know him, but something about the set of his shoulders, the way he stood slightly apart from the crowd, suggested he didn't belong here any more than she did. "Excuse me?" Thomas sputtered. The man stepped forward. He moved with a deliberate slowness, like someone who'd learned not to make sudden movements because sudden movements led to pain. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, but it carried. "I said it's pathetic. You want to be rid of her, just say so. Don't dress it up in economics and pretend you're doing her a favor." "Now you listen here," Thomas began, but the stranger wasn't finished. "How much to end this?" The question hung in the air. Thomas blinked. "I'm sorry. How much money would it take for you to stop this spectacle and let her go?" "Let her go where?" Eleanor demanded, pushing forward to stand beside her husband. "She's got nowhere to go, no money, no prospects. We're trying to find her a place." "You're trying to humiliate her," the man said flatly. "Probably because she saw through you and you couldn't stand it. So how much?" Thomas's face cycled through several shades of red. "The bidding is at $5 for 3 months of—" "Not the bidding. I'm asking how much you'd take to release her from any obligation to you or your family, permanently." Martha's breath caught. She looked at the stranger more carefully now, trying to understand what was happening. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, dark and tired and carrying their own weight of sorrow, were fixed on Thomas with an intensity that made her nephew shrink back. That's not, Thomas stammered. $50, Eleanor cut in, her voice sharp. $50, and you can take her. But that releases us from any future responsibility. She's not our problem anymore. Eleanor! Thomas looked shocked, though Martha suspected it was more at the amount than the sentiment. But the stranger was already reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a leather pouch, counted out bills with methodical precision, and stepped up to the platform. He held the money out to Thomas, who stared at it like it might bite him. "Take it," the stranger said. Thomas took it. His hand shook slightly as he counted the bills, as if he couldn't quite believe this was happening. Eleanor's eyes had gone wide and calculating, already spending the windfall in her mind. The stranger turned to Martha then. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the scar that ran along his jawline, the way his shoulders carried tension like a yoke. He was younger than her, maybe 45, maybe less, but he looked like he'd lived several lifetimes already. "Ma'am?" he said quietly. "My name is Ethan Ward. I've got a ranch about 10 miles west of here, up in the foothills. It's small, and it's struggling, and it's got just me rattling around in it these days. I'm not buying you. I'm not hiring you. I'm offering you a choice." Martha stared at him. Her throat had gone tight, and she didn't trust her voice. Ethan continued, his voice steady and low, meant for her ears primarily, though the crowd was straining to hear. "You can come with me. Work if you want to, or don't. I've got a spare room. It's yours if you want it. Food, shelter, safety. No obligations beyond basic decency, which I expect from everyone, including myself. Or," he paused, "or you can take 25 of these dollars and go wherever you choose. Stage leaves for Sacramento twice a week. You could make a new start somewhere. Your choice, Mrs. Cole. Entirely yours." The square had gone silent. Even the usual sounds of the town seemed to have faded away, leaving just the thud of Martha's heart in her ears and the question hanging between them. A choice. When was the last time anyone had offered her a choice? She looked at Thomas, who was studiously avoiding her gaze, counting and recounting the money in his hands. She looked at Eleanor, whose mouth was pinched with disapproval at this turn of events. She looked at the crowd, at all those faces that had come to watch her degradation like it was entertainment. Then she looked back at Ethan Ward, at this strange man who had just spent what was probably months of wages to stop her humiliation, who was offering her something she'd almost forgotten existed: agency. Why? The word came out rough, barely more than a whisper. Ethan's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said simply, "Because no one should have to stand where you're standing. Not for any reason." It wasn't a complete answer. She could see there was more, layers of history and hurt that informed his actions, but it was enough. It was honest. Martha took a breath, then another. Then she said, "I'll come with you if the offer's genuine." "It is." "Then I accept." Ethan held out his hand, not to lead her, but to help her down from the platform. His palm was calloused, rough with work, and warm. She took it and stepped down, her legs shaky but holding. Behind them, Thomas cleared his throat. "Well, that's settled then. Eleanor, we should—" "Martha." Eleanor's voice stopped them as they turned to leave. Martha looked back. Her nephew's wife had arranged her features into an expression of concern so false it was almost insulting. "You'll send word if things don't work out. We wouldn't want you to be stranded." The audacity of it, the sheer breathtaking audacity, nearly made Martha laugh. But Ethan spoke before she could. "She won't be stranded," he said, his voice cold as January wind. "And I'd advise you both to consider this transaction complete and final. Mrs. Cole doesn't owe you her labor, her gratitude, or her correspondence." He didn't wait for a response. He simply turned, his hand still steadying Martha's elbow, and guided her through the parting crowd. People stared. Some whispered. Mrs. Henshaw caught Martha's eye and gave a small nod of approval. But mostly they just watched, uncertain what to make of what they'd witnessed. Ethan's wagon was hitched at the far end of the square, a sturdy farm wagon with worn wood and wheels that had seen many miles. He helped Martha up onto the bench seat with a gentleness that made her throat tight again, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. They left Bitter Springs without looking back. The road west climbed gradually into the foothills, where scrub oak clung to the slopes and the dust wasn't quite as oppressive. Neither of them spoke for the first mile. Martha kept her hands folded in her lap, her mind spinning with the impossibility of the past hour. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Ethan to reveal what he really wanted, what the true price of his charity would be. But he just drove, his attention on the road, his profile unreadable. Finally, Martha couldn't stand the silence anymore. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. $50 that's a fortune for most people, for anyone, really." "It's money," Ethan said. "I earned it. I spent it. That's how money works." "But why spend it on me? You don't know me. I could be—" I could be exactly what they said. Old, useless, failing. Ethan glanced at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You're not any of those things, and even if you were, you'd still deserve better than what they were doing to you. You can't know that I'm not. I know that you stood on that platform with your head up, Ethan interrupted quietly. I know that you didn't cry or beg or curse them, though you had every right to do all three. I know that when your nephew tried to sell you for the price of a decent horse, you took it with more dignity than most people could manage. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Martha fell silent. She didn't know what to say to that, how to respond to being seen, truly seen, for the first time in longer than she could remember. They drove on. The land began to change as they climbed higher. The drought was visible here too. The grass was brown, the creek beds dry, but there was a different quality to the air, cleaner somehow, quieter. Tell me about the ranch, Martha said eventually. What should I expect? Ethan's hands tightened slightly on the reins. It's not much. 200 acres, most of it barely usable in good years and worthless in drought. I've got maybe 30 head of cattle left, down from nearly 100 3 years ago. A few chickens that are too stubborn to die. The house is sound enough. My father built it to last, but it's been just me for the past 2 years, so it's Spartan. You said you had a spare room. I do. It was... He paused, and Martha saw the muscles in his jaw work. It was my daughter's room. She and my wife died of fever 2 years back. Winter of '83. The room's been empty since. The grief in those simple words was profound. Martha understood then, with sudden clarity, that Ethan Ward hadn't rescued her out of some noble impulse. He'd done it because he understood what it was to be thrown away by the world, to stand in a place where you didn't belong and have nowhere else to go. I'm sorry, she said softly. So am I. He glanced at her. I'm not looking for sympathy, Mrs. Cole. I'm just being honest about what you're walking into. It's not a happy place. It's not even a particularly comfortable place, but it's safe, and it's yours if you want it. Martha, she said. Call me Martha. Ethan, he replied. They drove the rest of the way in companionable silence. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when Ethan turned the wagon off the main road onto a narrow track that wound between oak trees and over a dry creek bed. They crested a small rise, and there it was, the Ward Ranch. It was exactly as he'd described, small, struggling, worn down by drought and neglect. The house was a simple wooden structure with a covered porch, painted white once upon a time, but now faded to gray in places. The barn beyond it leaned slightly to one side, like an old man favoring a bad leg. Fences needed mending, the yard needed clearing. The whole place had the air of a thing that had been loved once and was now just enduring. But it was also quiet, peaceful. And as Martha stepped down from the wagon, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel again. Possibility. Ethan showed her inside. The house was indeed Spartan. Bare floors, simple furniture, everything clean but minimal. There was a kitchen with a wood stove and a table, a sitting room with 2 chairs and a cold fireplace, 2 bedrooms, one obviously Ethan's and one that must have belonged to his daughter. That room stopped Martha in her tracks. It was frozen in time, a child's room, with a small bed and a rag doll sitting on the pillow, a shelf with 3 books, a window that looked out over the hills. I couldn't... Ethan's voice came from behind her, rough with old pain. I couldn't pack it up, couldn't change it. Sarah, my wife, she would have wanted me to, but I just... How old was she? Martha asked gently. 7. Just turned 7 that October. Martha turned to look at him. This tall, quiet man who had saved her from humiliation, who had brought her to his empty house and offered her the most precious thing his heart still held. She understood the gift he was giving her and the cost. What was her name? Grace. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. We called her Gracie. May I? Martha gestured to the room. Ethan nodded, then retreated, leaving her alone. Martha stepped inside carefully, as if entering a church. She touched the doll's worn dress, the book's spines, the quilt on the bed. Then, moving with quiet purpose, she began to gently, respectfully pack things away. Not erasing Gracie, but making space for the living alongside the memory of her. When she emerged an hour later carrying the box of Gracie's things, Ethan was in the kitchen staring at the cold stove. He looked up as she entered. "I folded everything carefully," Martha said. "Wrap the doll in the quilt. The books are safe. Whenever you want them, wherever you want to put them, they're ready. But I thought—" She paused. "I thought maybe she'd be glad to know the room was being used, that someone else was being kept safe there." Ethan's eyes had gone bright with unshed tears. He nodded once, sharply, and turned away. His shoulders shook once, twice, then stilled. When he turned back, his voice was rough but steady. "There's beans in the pantry, salt pork, some flour. It's not much, but it's plenty," Martha said. "Why don't you show me where things are, and I'll make us some supper." They worked together in the kitchen as the light faded outside. Martha found her way around the space, noting what was there, what was missing, what needed replacing. Ethan moved like a man who'd been cooking for himself badly for too long, grateful to step aside and let someone else take the lead. The meal was simple: beans and pork, biscuits that came out better than Martha expected given the quality of the flour, coffee that was too strong but appreciated nonetheless. They ate at the small kitchen table, the silence between them no longer awkward but settling into something almost comfortable. "There's work, if you want it," Ethan said as they finished. "The garden's dead, but it could be revived if we can figure out the water situation. Chickens need tending. House needs cleaning, obviously. Fence mending. I'm not expecting—" "I want to work," Martha interrupted. "I want to be useful. I've been working my whole life, Ethan. I wouldn't know what to do with myself if I stopped." He nodded. "Then we'll work together. Equal partners in keeping this place alive. You pull your weight, I pull mine, and we figure out the rest as we go." "Equal partners," Martha repeated, testing the words. They felt foreign, strange, but also right. "Equal partners," Ethan confirmed. That night, Martha lay in Gracie's room, her room now, and stared at the ceiling. The mattress was thin but clean. The night air was cool coming through the window. Somewhere outside, an owl called and another answered. For the first time in 30 years, she was sleeping in a space that was hers, making decisions that were hers, living a life that belonged to her. She thought about Thomas and Eleanor, probably already spending the $50 on something frivolous. She thought about Bitter Springs, about the faces in that crowd. She thought about the auction block and the humiliation and the casual cruelty of people who should have loved her. Then she thought about Ethan Ward, this broken man who had seen her pain and stopped it, who had offered her not charity, but partnership, who had given her the one thing she'd lost track of, choice. Tomorrow, she would start learning the rhythms of the ranch. She would figure out the water situation and tend the chickens and sweep the floors. She would work alongside Ethan to keep this struggling place alive. She would earn her keep, prove her worth, justify the $50 he'd spent. But tonight, she simply rested. In her own room, in her own space, in a life that was, for the first time in decades, entirely her own. The tears came then. Not tears of sadness, but of relief so profound it felt like pain. She cried quietly, her face pressed into the pillow that still faintly smelled of lavender and childhood, and she let herself grieve for all the years she'd lost and celebrate the chance she'd been given to reclaim whatever years remained. Outside, the owl called again. The night wind rustled through the oak trees. The ranch settled around her, this place of old sorrow and new possibility. And Martha Cole, for the first time in longer than she could remember, allowed herself to hope. The moon rose higher, casting silver light through the window. In the other bedroom, Ethan lay awake as well, staring at his own ceiling, wondering if he'd made a mistake or performed a miracle, wondering if saving someone else from loneliness might somehow save him from his own. Neither of them had answers yet, but they had time to find them. They had space to heal. They had each other in whatever form that partnership would take. And in a drought-stricken valley where everything was dying, that was more than either of them had dared to dream possible. The first day of their new life together ended as quietly as it had begun, with two broken people finding shelter under the same roof, bound not by obligation or ownership, but by the simple, radical act of mutual respect. It was a small beginning, but all lasting things start small, and this was only the beginning. Dawn came early to the ranch, announced by a rooster that Martha hadn't known existed until it crowed directly outside her window. She startled awake, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar room, the different quality of light. Then memory returned. The auction, Ethan, the choice she'd made. And she sat up quickly, heart racing with a mixture of anxiety and determination. The house was silent. Martha dressed in the same worn dress from yesterday, then braided her hair with practiced efficiency. When she emerged from her room, she found the kitchen empty, but evidence of Ethan's earlier presence. A cold cup of coffee on the counter, the back door standing open to the morning air. She stepped outside and found him by the chicken coop, scattering feed from a dented metal pail. He looked up as she approached, his expression guarded in the way of someone unused to sharing his mornings. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said. "That rooster's got no sense of courtesy." "I should have been up earlier." Martha looked around the yard, seeing it properly for the first time in daylight. The damage was worse than she'd realized. Fences sagging, weeds choking what had once been garden beds, the barn's lean more pronounced. But underneath the neglect, she could see the bones of something good. "What needs doing first?" Ethan studied her for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she truly meant it. "You don't have to—" "I know I don't have to," Martha interrupted gently but firmly. "I want to. So what needs doing?" He set down the pail. "Well, if you're serious, we've got more problems than solutions. Water's the biggest one. Creek's been dry since last summer, and the well's running low. I've been hauling water from a spring about 2 miles north, but it's not sustainable. Garden's dead, like I said. Fences need mending before what's left of the cattle wander off. Barn roof's got holes. Kitchen garden could be salvaged, maybe, if we can figure out irrigation." "Show me the kitchen garden," Martha said. They walked together to the plot behind the house. It was a sad sight. Dried stalks of what had once been tomatoes, the skeletal remains of bean plants, earth baked hard as clay. Martha knelt and dug her fingers into the soil. It crumbled, dusty and depleted, but underneath she could feel moisture, faint but present. "There's still life in it," she said, looking up at Ethan. "It needs water and amendment, but it's not dead. Not completely." "I gave up on it last fall," Ethan admitted. "Seemed pointless to fight for vegetables when I could barely keep the cattle alive." Martha stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "May I try? I can't promise anything, but I've been gardening since I was a girl. I might be able to coax something out of it." "You're welcome to try. Tools are in the barn, but Martha—" He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Don't break your back over it. It's just dirt." "Nothing's just dirt," Martha said quietly. "Dirt is where things grow, where they come back to life." Something flickered in Ethan's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. He nodded once, then turned toward the barn. "I'll be working on the north fence if you need anything." They separated to their tasks. Martha found the tools exactly where Ethan said they'd be, though it took some searching through the cluttered barn. She selected a hoe, a spade, and a rake, testing their weight and balance. Good tools, well made, just neglected like everything else on this ranch. She worked methodically, starting at one corner of the garden plot. The physical labor felt good, purposeful in a way that cooking and cleaning for Thomas's family had stopped feeling years ago. Her muscles protested at first, unaccustomed to this particular kind of strain, but she pushed through. Sweat dampened her collar. Her hands, already calloused, developed new blisters that burst and reformed as tougher skin. By midday, she'd cleared half the plot and begun turning the soil, breaking up the compacted earth to let air reach the deeper layers. She was so absorbed in the work that she didn't hear Ethan approach until his shadow fell across the bed she was working. "You should rest," he said. "It's too hot to be working this hard." Martha straightened, one hand pressed to the small of her back. "I'm all right." "You're not all right. You're red as a beet and swaying on your feet." His voice was stern, but there was concern underneath it. "Come inside. There's water and shade." She wanted to argue, but the dizziness that washed over her when she tried to bend again told her he was right. She let him take the hoe from her hands and followed him to the house. Inside, the relative coolness was a shock. Ethan poured her water from a pitcher and watched with obvious relief as she drank it down. Then he disappeared into the pantry and emerged with bread and cheese. "Not much, but it's something," he said, setting it on the table between them. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Martha said, "Tell me about the spring, the one you've been hauling water from." Ethan looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to make that garden work, I need to understand our water situation. How far is it? How much can you haul? Is there any way to divert it closer?" He sat back, considering. "It's maybe 2 miles north, up in the rocks. Clear water, good flow even in drought. I can haul about 30 gallons at a time in the wagon, but it takes half a day there and back with the roads the way they are. As for diverting it," he shook his head. "I thought about it. Problem is the elevation and the distance. We'd need pipe or channel, and both cost money I don't have." Martha thought about this, turning the problem over in her mind like a puzzle. "What about a cistern, something to collect rainwater when it finally does rain?" "I built one," Ethan said. 3 years ago, before the drought really set in. It's behind the barn. Holds maybe 500 gallons when full, but it's been empty for over a year now." "Still, when the rains come—" "If the rains come," Ethan corrected, but without heat. Just the weary pragmatism of someone who'd stopped trusting the sky. "When," Martha repeated firmly. "When they come, we'll be ready." Over the following days, a rhythm established itself. Ethan would wake before dawn and tend to the immediate necessities, feeding animals, checking the remaining cattle, maintaining what equipment still worked. Martha would begin in the kitchen garden, working until the heat drove her inside, then shift to household tasks, sweeping, mending, organizing the chaos that had accumulated during 2 years of grief-stricken neglect. They worked separately but in parallel, like two planets in the same orbit, never quite touching but bound by the same gravitational pull. Meals were quiet affairs, conversation sparse but not uncomfortable. Ethan wasn't used to talking, and Martha was still learning how to speak when her words actually mattered. But slowly, incrementally, things began to shift. It started small. One evening, as Martha was preparing supper, Ethan came in from the barn and paused in the doorway. She looked up from the pot she was stirring. "Something wrong?" she asked. "No, He gestured vaguely. "It smells good. I forgot what it was like to have a house smell like cooking instead of just dust and loneliness." Martha felt warmth bloom in her chest. "It's just stew, nothing fancy." "It's not nothing," Ethan said quietly. Then, as if embarrassed by the admission, he retreated to wash up. Another day, Martha was struggling to move a heavy stone from the garden bed when Ethan appeared beside her. He didn't say anything, just bent and helped her lift it, their hands nearly touching on the rough surface. Together they hauled it to the edge of the plot and let it drop. "Thank you," Martha said, breathing hard. "You don't have to do this alone," Ethan replied. "Any of it." "Neither do you," she said, meeting his eyes. He held her gaze for a moment, something unspoken passing between them, then nodded and returned to his fence mending. The garden began, against all odds, to respond. Martha had found seeds in the barn. Old packets, some maybe too old to germinate, but she planted them anyway in the beds she'd cleared and amended with composted chicken manure. She hauled water from the house in buckets, precious cupfuls that she distributed like a miser counting coins. She rigged shade cloth from old burlap sacks to protect tender seedlings from the brutal midday sun. And miraculously, things grew. First the radishes, poking brave green shoots through the earth, then lettuce, delicate but determined. Bean vines that climbed the stakes she'd fashioned from fallen branches. It wasn't much, a far cry from the abundance this garden had probably seen in better years, but it was life, insisting on itself despite drought and doubt. Ethan noticed, of course. He didn't comment directly, but Martha would catch him looking at the garden beds with an expression she couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, or fear of hope, which was sometimes worse. 2 weeks after her arrival, Martha was in the barn searching for additional tools when she heard voices outside. Men's voices, multiple, speaking in tones that carried aggression like a raised fist. She moved to the barn door and peered out carefully. 3 riders had arrived in the yard. Ethan stood facing them, his posture rigid. Even from a distance, Martha could read the tension in the scene. "Telling you for the last time, Ward," one of the men was saying. He sat astride a large bay horse, his bulk impressive and intentionally intimidating. Mr. Dalton's made a fair offer, more than fair considering the state of this place. And I'm telling you for the last time, Ethan replied, his voice level but hard. This ranch isn't for sale. Not to Dalton, not to anyone. Be reasonable, another rider chimed in, this one younger with a mean set to his mouth. You can't make this place pay. Everyone knows it. Drought's killed you just like it's killed half the valley. Why not take the money and start fresh somewhere else? Because this is my home, Ethan said flatly. The big man on the bay horse leaned forward in his saddle. Mr. Dalton's been very patient, but patience has limits. He needs this land, needs the water rights that come with it. That spring up in your north section? That's valuable, especially now. You're sitting on something bigger than you realize. So that was it. Martha understood immediately. The spring Ethan had been using wasn't just a convenience. It was apparently significant enough that someone else wanted control of it. The spring's on my land, Ethan said, and my land's not for sale. Everything's for sale, the big man said. It's just a matter of price, or, he paused meaningfully, persuasion. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Martha saw Ethan's hands curl into fists at his sides, saw the way his jaw tightened. She also saw that he was alone against 3 men, and that this conversation was heading somewhere dangerous. She stepped out of the barn. All 4 men turned to look at her. She walked forward steadily, even though her heart was hammering, and stopped beside Ethan. Gentlemen, she said, her voice carrying the polite ice she'd perfected over 30 years of dealing with her sister-in-law. I believe Mr. Ward has made his position clear. The big man's eyes narrowed. And who might you be? Martha Cole. I work here. Work here? The man's tone made it clear what he thought that meant. Well, Miss Cole, this doesn't concern you. This is business between Mr. Ward and Mr. Dalton. Mrs. Cole, Martha corrected, and anything that concerns this ranch concerns me. Ethan glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. She kept her attention on the riders. The younger one laughed. You're going to hide behind a woman's skirts now, Ward? I'm not hiding behind anything, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. And you'll speak to Mrs. Cole with respect, or you'll leave, immediately. The big man held up a hand, forestalling whatever his companion was about to say. Apologies, Mrs. Cole, no offense intended. We're just trying to conduct business here. Then conduct it elsewhere, Martha said. This ranch is not for sale. The spring is not for sale. And I believe you've been asked to leave. You believe, E. The young one started forward, but the big man stopped him with a sharp word. We're going, he said, though his eyes promised this wasn't over. But you tell Mr. Dalton's coming himself next week. He likes to handle important negotiations personally. Maybe he'll have better luck convincing you to see reason. I doubt it, Ethan said. The riders turned their horses. As they did, the big man looked back. Think carefully, Ward. The drought's not ending. Your cattle are dying. Your land's drying up. How long can you really hold out? They rode away, dust rising behind them like a threat. Ethan and Martha stood in the yard until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then Ethan turned to her. You shouldn't have done that. Done what? Put yourself in the middle of this. Those men, Dalton's men, they're not playing games. Neither am I, Martha said. And you needed someone standing with you. I know you can handle yourself, Martha interrupted. But that doesn't mean you should have to. We're partners, remember? Equal partners. Ethan stared at her, something working in his expression. Then, unexpectedly, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Equal partners who make terrible strategic decisions together? If necessary, Martha said, and found herself smiling back. The moment broke when Ethan's expression sobered. Martha, I need to tell you something about the spring, about why Dalton wants this land so badly. They walked to the house and sat at the kitchen table. Ethan poured coffee, still too strong, but Martha was getting used to it, and began to explain. The spring in my north section is part of a larger aquifer that runs through these foothills. Most of it's on my land, some on the property to the east. Charles Dalton owns everything to the south and west, almost 10,000 acres. He's the biggest landowner in the county, and he's been buying up smaller ranches for the past 5 years. Why? Because he's smart. He saw the drought coming before most people did, and he realized that whoever controls the water controls the valley. If he gets my spring, he controls the only reliable water source for 20 miles in any direction. That means he controls who survives and who doesn't. Martha absorbed this. So it's not just about your ranch. No, it's about power, about building an empire while everyone else is too desperate to resist. Ethan's voice was bitter. He's already forced out the Hendersons, the Ramirez family, old Tom Sutton, bought their land for pennies on the dollar when they got desperate enough. I'm the last holdout. And he's tired of waiting. He's been patient for 2 years, but I think he's finally decided patience isn't working. Ethan looked at her directly. Martha, if you want to leave, I'll understand. I'll give you money for the stage and you can... I'm not leaving, Martha said firmly. You don't know what you're saying. Dalton's ruthless. I'm not leaving, she repeated. I've spent 30 years being pushed around by people who thought they knew better than me, who thought my life was theirs to control. I'm done with that. This ranch, it may not be much, but it's honest work and honest living, and I'm not going to run just because some rich man thinks he can bully us into selling. Us, Ethan repeated softly. Us, Martha confirmed. We're in this together now, whether you like it or not. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Thank you. For what? For standing. For staying. For, he gestured helplessly, for being brave when I'm not sure I am anymore. You're brave, Martha said. You're just tired. There's a difference. That evening, they worked together on the fence line in the north pasture, near where the spring emerged from the rocks. The water was indeed clear and cold, bubbling up from some deep source that the drought hadn't been able to touch. Martha could see immediately why Dalton wanted it. How much land would we need to protect the spring itself, she asked. All of the north section, about 50 acres. But it's not just about protecting it. We'd need to be able to defend our claim if Dalton tries legal maneuvering. Is the deed clear? It is. My father made sure of that. But Dalton's got lawyers and money and friends in the territorial government. He could make things difficult even with a clear deed. Martha looked at the spring, at the precious water flowing from the earth like a promise. An idea began to form in her mind. What if we made the spring useful to more people? Not Dalton, but the other ranchers, the smallholders who are struggling. Ethan frowned. I'm not following. If this spring could help others survive the drought, they'd have a stake in protecting it. Dalton couldn't just take it without making enemies of half the county. It's harder to bully everyone than it is to bully one man alone. You're talking about sharing the water. I'm talking about building alliances, about making sure that what happens to this ranch matters to more people than just us. Ethan considered this, his expression thoughtful. It could work, but it would also paint a bigger target on our backs. Dalton wouldn't take kindly to us undermining his strategy. I suspect he's not taking kindly to us anyway, Martha pointed out. Despite the situation's seriousness, Ethan laughed, a genuine laugh that transformed his face, making him look years younger. That's fair. They returned to the house as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, Martha prepared supper while Ethan sat at the table, sketching out ideas for a water-sharing system on the back of an old feed receipt. We could run a pipe down to the southern boundary, he said, thinking aloud. Let the Petersons tap into it for their cattle, and maybe extend something east to where the Chens are struggling. Would they trust it, Martha asked, or would they see it as charity? If we charged a minimal fee, something to cover maintenance, it becomes business, not charity. Pride's easier to swallow when there's reciprocity. Martha smiled, stirring the pot on the stove. You're smarter than you let on, Ethan Ward. I've had a good teacher recently, he replied, meeting her eyes. The moment held, stretching between them like a rope drawing taut. Then Martha turned back to the stove, and Ethan returned to his sketches, and the evening settled into comfortable productivity. Later, after they'd eaten and cleaned up, they sat on the porch as the stars emerged. The night air was cooler here in the foothills, carrying the scent of sage and dust and possibility. Can I ask you something? Ethan said. Of course. Why did you stay? Really? You could have taken the money and started over somewhere new, somewhere easier. Martha was quiet for a moment, watching the stars. Because easy isn't always better, and because— She paused, searching for the right words. Because I've spent my whole life being invisible, being the extra pair of hands that kept things running but never got acknowledged. When you offered me a choice that day, when you saw me as a person instead of a burden or a commodity, it woke something up in me that I thought had died. What was that? Hope, Martha said simply, and the belief that maybe I deserved more than what I'd settled for. Ethan was silent, but she could feel him listening with his whole attention. I'm not afraid of hard work, Martha continued. I'm not afraid of drought or uncertain futures or even men like Dalton. What I was afraid of, what I'd been afraid of for years, was disappearing completely, becoming so small and insignificant that I stopped mattering even to myself. You gave me a chance to matter again. That's not something I'm going to walk away from, no matter how hard it gets. You matter, Ethan said, his voice rough. You've always mattered. The fact that your family couldn't see that just means they're fools. Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that came from being truly seen. Thank you. They sat in companionable silence as the night deepened. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. The wind rustled through the oak trees. The ranch settled around them, creaking and breathing like a living thing. I'm glad you stayed, Ethan said finally. So am I. The weeks that followed were filled with work and purpose. True to his word, Ethan began reaching out to neighboring ranchers about the water sharing idea. The response was mixed. Some were grateful, others suspicious, a few openly hostile, calling it a trick or a trap. But enough were willing to listen that the plan began to take shape. Meanwhile, Martha's garden continued its improbable revival. She'd managed to coax tomatoes into bearing fruit, small and precious, but real. The lettuce grew in successive plantings. She'd even found some squash seeds that had germinated, sending vines crawling across the amended earth. One afternoon, she was harvesting lettuce when she heard a wagon approaching. She looked up to see Mrs. Henshaw from Bitter Springs climbing down from the driver's seat, her face set in determined lines. Mrs. Henshaw, Martha said, surprised but pleased, what brings you out here? The older woman looked around the ranch, taking in the repairs, the garden, the signs of life returning to a place that had been dying. Then she looked at Martha, really looked at her, and smiled. Came to see if the rumors were true, she said. Half the town's saying you're being held against your will out here. The other half says you've lost your mind. And what do you say? I say you look better than I've seen you look in years, Mrs. Henshaw said bluntly. Got color in your cheeks and fire in your eyes. So I figured I'd bring you some things. She gestured to the wagon bed, where Martha could see baskets covered with cloth. Together they unloaded the wagon, jars of preserves, a sack of cornmeal, some fabric scraps for mending, and most precious of all, a small sack of vegetable seeds. Can't have you starting over with just what you scrounged from that barn, Mrs. Henshaw said gruffly. A proper garden needs proper seeds. Martha felt her throat tighten. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep proving those fools in town wrong about you. They had tea on the porch, and Martha told her about the ranch, about the work, about Ethan's plan for the spring. Mrs. Henshaw listened, asked sharp questions, and nodded approvingly at the answers. You've done well, she said as she prepared to leave. Both of you. It's not easy building something new from broken pieces, but you're doing it. After she left, Martha stood in the yard holding the sack of seeds and feeling something shift inside her chest. It wasn't just Mrs. Henshaw's approval, though that meant more than she could say. It was the realization that she was building something, not just surviving, but actually creating a life that had meaning and purpose and possibility. That evening, she and Ethan planted the new seeds together in the garden, their hands working in the soil as the light faded. They didn't talk much, but the silence was full of understanding, of shared purpose, of something neither of them was quite ready to name, but both of them could feel growing stronger with each passing day. As the stars emerged and they walked back to the house, Martha allowed herself to believe, truly believe, that the life she was building here might actually last, that the choice she'd made on that auction platform might turn out to be the best decision she'd ever made. And beside her, Ethan Ward smiled at the darkening sky, feeling something he'd thought was lost forever beginning, tentatively, to take root in the depleted soil of his heart, the fragile, terrifying, wonderful possibility of happiness. The happiness proved fragile. 3 days after Mrs. Henshaw's visit, the riders returned. This time, there were 5 of them, and Charles Dalton himself rode at their head. Martha saw them coming from the garden, where she'd been tying up tomato vines in the early morning coolness. The dust cloud rose on the eastern road, and something in the deliberate pace of their approach made her heart clench with foreboding. She dropped the twine and hurried toward the house, calling for Ethan. He emerged from the barn, took one look at the approaching riders, and his expression hardened into something carved from stone. "Go inside," he said quietly. "No." "Martha, we're partners," she said, moving to stand beside him. "I'm not hiding." Ethan's jaw worked, but he didn't argue further. Together they waited as the riders entered the yard and drew their horses to a halt in a semicircle that felt deliberately intimidating. Charles Dalton was a man in his early 50s, prosperous and well-fed, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that assessed everything with the cold calculation of someone who measured the world in terms of profit and loss. He wore expensive clothes that looked absurd in the dusty ranch yard, and he sat his horse with the confidence of a man who had never been told no in any way that mattered. "Mr. Ward," he said, his voice smooth and cultured, "I apologize for the intrusion. I thought it was time we spoke face to face." "We don't have anything to speak about," Ethan replied. "Your men already delivered your message. My answer hasn't changed." "Ah, but I think it might once you hear what I'm prepared to offer." Dalton's gaze shifted to Martha, and she felt the weight of his appraisal like something physical. "And you must be the woman I've heard about. Martha Cole, isn't it?" "Mrs. Cole," Martha said, keeping her voice level. "Of course, Mrs. Cole." Dalton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I understand you've been helping Mr. Ward with his little ranch here. Admirable. Though I wonder if you truly understand the situation you've walked into." "I understand it perfectly well, Mr. Dalton." "Do you?" He leaned forward slightly in his saddle. "Do you understand that this ranch is dying? That the drought has broken better men than Ward here? That you're throwing your labor and your future into a losing proposition?" "I understand that you want something that doesn't belong to you," Martha said, "and that you're used to getting what you want through intimidation." One of Dalton's men, the big one who'd come before, shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his belt. Ethan's posture changed subtly, weight shifting forward. The tension ratcheted up another notch. Dalton held up a hand, stopping both men. "I'm not here to intimidate anyone, Mrs. Cole. I'm here to make a fair business proposition." "We've heard your proposition," Ethan said. "The answer is no." "You haven't heard my new proposition." Dalton reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded paper. "I'm prepared to offer you $15,000 for this property. That's more than triple what I offered 6 months ago, and probably 10 times what this land is actually worth in its current condition. Take the money, Mr. Ward. Start fresh somewhere else, somewhere with water and a future." The sum was staggering. Martha felt Ethan go very still beside her, and she understood why. $15,000 was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. It was freedom. It was possibility. It was temptation wrapped in pragmatism and tied with a bow of seeming generosity. "No," Ethan said. Dalton's eyebrows rose. "You're refusing $15,000 for a failing ranch?" "I'm refusing to sell my home to a man who wants it for all the wrong reasons." "Wrong reasons?" Dalton's voice sharpened. "I'm a businessman, Mr. Ward. I see opportunity where others see obstacles. The spring on your property is valuable. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise, but that value could benefit everyone. Under my management, that water could be distributed efficiently, productively. It could help rebuild this entire valley." "Under your control, you mean?" Martha interjected. "With you deciding who gets water and who doesn't, who survives and who fails." Dalton turned his attention to her fully now, and there was something dangerous in his gaze. "You're very bold, Mrs. Cole, for someone who arrived in this valley on an auction block. Did you really think I wouldn't hear about that? About how Ward here bought you like a piece of property?" The words hit like a slap. Martha felt heat flood her face, shame and anger mixing into something that made her hands shake. Beside her, Ethan went rigid. You watch your mouth, Ethan said, his voice dropping to something lethal. I'm simply stating facts, Dalton said mildly. And the fact is, Mrs. Cole, that you have no standing here. No legal claim, no social position, nothing but the charity of a man who's too stubborn to see reason. When this ranch fails, and it will fail, where will you be? Back on that auction block? Or perhaps somewhere worse? That's enough. Ethan stepped forward, his fists clenched. You've made your offer. I've refused it. Now get off my land before I remove you myself. Dalton didn't move. Instead, he smiled that cold smile again. I'm trying to be reasonable, Ward. I'm trying to give you a way out with your dignity intact. But if you insist on being stubborn... He let the sentence hang, the threat implicit. I insist on you leaving, Ethan said. Now. For a long moment, no one moved. The 5 riders sat their horses, hands near weapons, waiting for a signal from Dalton. Ethan stood his ground, outnumbered but unbowed. Martha's heart hammered so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Then Dalton shrugged, a gesture of elaborate unconcern. Very well. I've made my best offer in good faith. When you change your mind, and you will change your mind, the price will be lower, substantially lower. He gathered his reins. Enjoy your garden, Mrs. Cole. I hope the tomatoes are worth what you're both about to lose. He turned his horse and rode out, his men following. They didn't hurry, making the point that they weren't being driven off, just choosing to leave. The dust settled slowly behind them, and silence reclaimed the yard. Martha realized she was shaking. Ethan noticed and turned to her, his anger giving way to concern. Are you all right? He knew, Martha said, her voice unsteady. About the auction, about Thomas, about all of it. Men like Dalton make it their business to know things, Ethan said grimly. Information is power, and he wields it like a weapon. He tried to humiliate me, to make you see me as something shameful. Nothing about you is shameful, Ethan said fiercely. He reached out as if to touch her arm, then stopped, his hand hovering uncertainly. What happened in Bitter Springs, what your family did to you, that shame belongs to them, not you, never you. Martha looked up at him, at the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Why did you really buy me that day? The question hung between them. Ethan's hand dropped to his side. He looked away toward the distant hills, and when he spoke, his voice was raw. Because I know what it's like to be standing in a place where no one sees you as human anymore. After Sarah and Gracie died, people looked at me like I was already a ghost, like the important parts of me had died with them, and what was left was just debris. Something to be pitied or avoided or forgotten. He brought his gaze back to hers. When I saw you on that platform, I saw myself, and I thought, if I could save you from that, maybe it would mean some part of me was still worth saving too. The honesty of it stole Martha's breath. She wanted to tell him that he was worth saving, that he'd never stopped being human, that his grief didn't make him debris, but before she could find the words, he was already turning away. I need to check the fence lines, he said. Make sure Dalton's men didn't sabotage anything on their way out. He left before she could respond. Martha stood alone in the yard, her emotions churning. The morning's peace had been shattered, replaced by something darker and more complicated. She went back to the garden, but her hands were still shaking too badly to work, so she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the tomato vines without really seeing them. Dalton had known exactly where to strike. He'd identified her vulnerability and used it like a blade, trying to drive a wedge between her and Ethan, trying to make her question her place here. And the terrible thing was, it had worked. Not completely, but enough to make her doubt, enough to make her wonder if she was truly building something here or just delaying the inevitable. She was still sitting there when she heard the sound, a sharp crack, followed by a heavy crash, and then Ethan's voice shouting her name. Martha ran. She found him in the barn, pinned beneath a massive beam that had fallen from the loft. The structure must have been more damaged than they'd realized, weakened by neglect and time and the weight of hay stored above. The beam had come down at an angle, trapping Ethan's leg and left arm beneath its weight. Ethan! She dropped to her knees beside him. His face was gray with pain, sweat beading on his forehead. It's bad, he managed. Can't move it. Can't get free. Martha looked at the beam. It was easily a foot-thick, solid oak, impossibly heavy. She tried to lift it, throwing all her strength against the weight, but it didn't budge even an inch. "The wagon!" Ethan gasped. "Get the wagon! Use it as a lever!" Martha ran. Her mind was racing, panic clawing at her throat, but she forced herself to think clearly. The wagon was in the yard, already hitched to the 2 draft horses from this morning's water run. She grabbed the reins and drove the team to the barn, positioning the wagon as close to the fallen beam as she could manage. Then she unhitched the horses, led them inside, and used ropes to create a makeshift pulley system, running the lines through the wagon's frame and tying them to the beam. It was crude, improvised, probably dangerous, but it was all she had. "This is going to hurt," she warned Ethan. "Can't hurt worse than this," he said through gritted teeth. Martha positioned herself at the horses' heads. She spoke to them in the calm, steady voice her father had taught her decades ago, gentling them, preparing them. Then she urged them forward. The horses strained, the ropes creaked, the beam lifted inch by agonizing inch, the wagon's frame protesting but holding. As soon as there was space, Martha darted in and dragged Ethan free, her strength fueled by fear and determination. The moment he was clear, she released the horses and the beam crashed back down, sending up a cloud of dust and straw. Martha knelt beside Ethan, her hands hovering over him, afraid to touch him in case something was broken. "Where are you hurt?" "Leg, left leg, and my arm, but—" He tried to move and went white. "The leg's worse." Martha carefully cut away his pant leg with the knife from her pocket. What she saw made her stomach turn. His shin was bent at an angle that was completely wrong, bone pressing against skin in a way that meant a bad break. Maybe multiple breaks. "We need to get you to town," she said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "To the doctor." "No time," Ethan said. His breathing was shallow, rapid. "Set it here. You have to set it here." "I can't. I don't know how." "You have to." He grabbed her hand with his good one, his grip fierce despite the pain. "Please, Martha, I trust you." She stared at him, at the desperation and pain in his eyes, and realized he was right. The ride to town would take hours. He could go into shock. The bone could shift, cause more damage. She had to do this here, now, with shaking hands and inadequate knowledge and nothing but necessity driving her forward. "All right," she said. "All right. Tell me what to do." Ethan talked her through it, his voice growing thinner as the pain dragged at him. Martha gathered supplies: clean cloth, wooden slats from a broken crate, rope, whiskey from the house. She made Ethan drink the whiskey, 3 long swallows that he choked down with difficulty. Then she set the bone. His scream echoed through the barn, through her, imprinting itself on her memory in a way she knew she'd never forget. She felt the bone shift beneath her hands, felt the terrible wrongness of it trying to find its way back to right. Tears streamed down her face as she worked, but her hands stayed steady, guided by instinct and desperate love she didn't dare examine too closely. When the bone was aligned, she splinted it with the slats and bound it tight with strips of cloth. Ethan had passed out, which was probably a mercy. Martha sat back on her heels, her whole body shaking with reaction, and tried not to vomit. But there was no time for falling apart. She needed to get him to the house, into bed, where she could tend to him properly. Using a piece of canvas as a stretcher, she managed to drag him out of the barn and across the yard. It took every ounce of strength she had, but she got him inside, onto his bed, and covered with blankets. Then she collapsed into the chair beside the bed and let herself cry, great wrenching sobs that came from someplace deep and primal, releasing all the fear and anger and helplessness of the day. When the tears finally stopped, Martha washed her face and got to work. She cleaned and bandaged the cuts on Ethan's arm where the beam had scraped him. She elevated his leg on pillows. She made willow bark tea for the pain and got it into him a spoonful at a time when he briefly surfaced to consciousness. Then she sat vigil, watching the rise and fall of his chest, terrified that each breath might be the last, that she'd done something wrong, that he'd slip away from her just when she'd realized how much he mattered. Night fell. Martha lit lamps and kept her watch. At some point she dozed, her head resting on the edge of the bed, her hand wrapped around Ethan's uninjured one. She woke to find him looking at her, his eyes fever-bright but aware. "You saved my life," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You would have done the same for me." "I would have tried." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "But I don't think I could have set a broken bone. I would have panicked." I did panic, Martha admitted. I just didn't let it stop me. Ethan's hand tightened around hers. You're remarkable, Martha Cole. I don't think you realize how remarkable. I'm just... Don't, he interrupted gently. Don't diminish what you did. Don't diminish who you are. They looked at each other in the lamplight, and Martha felt the shift happening, the thing that had been building between them for weeks finally crystallizing into something undeniable. She saw it reflected in Ethan's eyes, saw the way he was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been afraid to ask. Martha, he said, her name rough with emotion and pain and something else. I need to tell you something. Rest first, she said. Whatever you need to say can wait until... No, it can't. He struggled to sit up slightly, wincing. When that beam fell, when I was trapped there, thinking I might die, all I could think about was you, about how I'd never told you how I felt, about how I'd wasted all this time being afraid when I should have been. He broke off, breathing hard. Martha's heart was pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. Should have been what? She whispered. Loving you, Ethan said simply. I should have been loving you. I think I started loving you the day you stepped down from that platform and chose to trust me, and every day since has just made it stronger, made you more essential, made the idea of losing you... His voice cracked. Made the idea of losing you unbearable. Martha couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, could only stare at this man who'd saved her and whom she'd saved in return, who was offering her something she'd stopped believing existed. A love that saw her, chose her, claimed her not as property or obligation, but as an equal. I'm 55 years old, she finally said, her voice shaking. I'm past childbearing. I'm worn and weathered, and I come with nothing but the clothes on my back and a history of being discarded. You could find someone younger, someone who... I don't want younger, Ethan said fiercely. I don't want someone else. I want you. Your strength and your stubbornness and your kindness and your courage. I want your terrible coffee and your miraculous garden and the way you make this house feel like a home again. I want every day we have left, however many that is, with you beside me as my partner and my... He paused, searching for the right word. As my love. If you'll have me. The tears came again, but they were different this time. These were tears of joy, of relief, of something breaking open inside her that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. I love you too, she said. I think I started falling in love with you when you offered me a choice instead of ownership, when you saw me as a person instead of a burden. And yes, I'll have you. I'll have every day we can build together. Ethan's smile was radiant despite the pain etched in his features. He lifted his good hand to her face, cupping her cheek with a tenderness that made her breath catch. Then when I can stand without falling over, he said, I'm going to ask you properly, with a ring and a question and all the dignity you deserve. I don't need dignity, Martha said, leaning into his touch. I just need you. You'll have both, Ethan promised. They stayed like that, hands clasped, eyes locked, until exhaustion pulled Ethan back under. Martha kept her vigil through the rest of the night, but the fear had transformed into something else, a fierce protective love that would let nothing harm this man, this life, this fragile, beautiful thing they were building together. Dawn came softly, painting the room in shades of gold. Ethan's fever had broken, his breathing was steady, and when Martha finally allowed herself to sleep, she dreamed of spring rain and growing things, and a future that stretched out bright and possible before them. Outside, the ranch waited. The drought continued. Dalton's threat remained real and dangerous. There were still battles to fight, still challenges to face, but inside this room, in this moment, two people who'd been broken and discarded had found each other and chosen love. And that, Martha thought as sleep finally claimed her, was worth fighting for. Worth any sacrifice. Worth everything. Ethan's recovery was slow and painful, but Martha refused to let him surrender to despair. She tended his leg with a devotion that bordered on ferocity, changing bandages, monitoring for infection, making him exercise his ankle and toes, even when he cursed her stubbornness. The ranch work fell entirely on her shoulders now, and she carried it without complaint, feeding animals before dawn, hauling water in the brutal heat, mending fences with hands that blistered and bled and grew harder. On the 5th day after the accident, as she was helping Ethan navigate the difficult process of standing with makeshift crutches he'd fashioned from old broom handles, a knock sounded at the door. Martha's hand went instinctively to the rifle they'd taken to keeping near the entrance, but when she peered through the window, she recognized the Peterson family's wagon. James Peterson stood on the porch, hat in hand, his weathered face creased with concern. His wife Anna waited in the wagon with their 3 children. "Mrs. Cole," James said when Martha opened the door, "we heard about Ethan's accident. Came to see if there's anything we can do." The simple kindness of it nearly undid her. Martha had grown so accustomed to fighting alone that the offer of help felt almost foreign. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "He'll be glad to see you." Over the next hour, more neighbors arrived. The Chens brought food. Old Tom Sutton, who Martha had thought lost his ranch to Dalton, arrived with lumber for barn repairs. Mrs. Henshaw came with medical supplies and a stern lecture about proper bone setting that Martha endured with good grace. Even the Ramirez family, who'd been driven off their land 6 months ago but were living in town now, came bearing news. "Dalton's getting bolder," Carlos Ramirez told them, his voice tight with anger. "He bought the mercantile last week. Now he controls half the businesses in Bitter Springs. Anyone who crosses him finds their credit cut off, their supplies delayed." "He's building a stranglehold," James Peterson added grimly, "and we're running out of ways to resist." They gathered around Ethan's bedside, these survivors of Dalton's ambition, and Martha saw the defeat in their faces. They'd come to help with Ethan's recovery, but they'd also come looking for hope, for leadership, for someone to tell them there was still a way to fight. Ethan looked at Martha. She saw the question in his eyes and understood what he was asking. This was the moment. If they were going to make a stand, it had to be now, before more people lost everything. Martha took a breath and spoke. "The spring," she said. "We need to formalize the water sharing arrangement, make it legal and binding so Dalton can't simply take it if he takes this ranch." "How?" Anna Peterson asked. "Dalton's got lawyers. We've got nothing." "We've got each other," Martha replied. "And we've got the fact that water rights in this territory are complicated. If we can establish communal use of the spring, prove that multiple families depend on it for survival, it becomes much harder for one man to claim exclusive ownership." "She's right," Ethan said, struggling to sit up straighter. "There's precedent for shared water rights, especially in drought conditions. If we document who's been using the spring, how much for how long, we build a legal case for continued access regardless of who owns the land." "But you own the land," Tom Sutton pointed out, "and Dalton's trying to buy it. Once he does—" "I'm not selling," Ethan said firmly. "Not to Dalton, not to anyone." "He'll find another way," Carlos warned. "He always does. Legal challenges, sabotage, intimidation. The man doesn't accept no." "Then we make him accept it," Martha said. The words came out stronger than she felt, but she saw them land, saw the way people's expressions shifted from despair to something that might have been hope. "We document everything. We make sure every use of that spring is witnessed and recorded. We get statements from everyone who's relied on it, and we take it to the territorial court if we have to." "That costs money we don't have," James said quietly. "Then we find it," Martha replied. "We pool resources. We ask for help from people who understand what Dalton's doing. We fight with everything we have because the alternative is surrendering to a bully, and I'm done surrendering." The room fell silent. Martha felt the weight of their gazes, felt them measuring her words against their exhaustion and fear. Then Mrs. Henshaw laughed, a sharp bark of approval. "About time someone said it plain," the older woman declared. "I've got $300 saved. It's yours for legal fees if you need it." "I've got 50, Tom Sutton added. "We can contribute 100, James Peterson said, glancing at his wife, who nodded. One by one, the families pledged what they could. It wasn't a fortune, but it was something. More importantly, it was solidarity, proof that they were willing to fight together instead of being picked off one by one. After the neighbors left, Martha helped Ethan back into bed. He was exhausted from the visit, his leg throbbing despite the willow bark tea, but his eyes were bright with something that looked like pride. "You were magnificent," he said. I was terrified, Martha admitted. That's what made it magnificent. You were terrified, and you did it anyway. He caught her hand. When this is over, when I can stand without these damned crutches, I'm going to marry you, Martha Cole. If you'll still have me. I'll still have you, she said softly, broken leg and all. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Martha organized the water documentation effort, writing out to each family to record their usage, their need, their dependence on the spring. She wrote everything down in careful script in a ledger Tom Sutton had donated, noting dates and amounts and circumstances. Ethan, confined to bed but mentally sharp, helped her draft the legal language they'd need. The garden continued to thrive under Martha's care, producing more than she'd dared hope. She began preserving the harvest, putting up jars of tomatoes and pickled vegetables that lined the pantry shelves like soldiers preparing for siege. Every jar represented survival, proof that life could persist even in drought. Ethan improved slowly. By the 3rd week, he could navigate the house with crutches. By the 4th, he could make it to the porch and sit in the sun while Martha worked. They spent evenings planning, strategizing, building their case against a man who seemed to hold all the cards. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in late August, everything changed. Martha was in the garden when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. She looked up to see a young woman riding hard, her dark hair streaming behind her, her face streaked with tears and dust. The girl pulled her exhausted horse to a halt in the yard and practically fell from the saddle. "Please," she gasped. "Please, you have to help me. I don't know where else to go." Martha ran to her, catching her as she stumbled. "What's wrong? What happened?" "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm James and Anna's niece. I worked as a maid in Dalton's house." The girl was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "I heard things, terrible things, and when I tried to leave, his men, they said they'd kill me if I talked. But people need to know. Someone needs to stop him." Ethan had made his way to the porch, leaning heavily on his crutches. "Come inside," he called. "You're safe here." They brought Sarah inside and got water into her, waited while she calmed enough to speak coherently. What she told them made Martha's blood run cold. Dalton hadn't just been buying up ranches, he'd been systematically destroying them first. The mysterious cattle deaths that had plagued the Henderson Ranch? Dalton's men had poisoned the water. The barn fire that had finally broken the Ramirez family? Arson, covered up as accident. The drought was real, but Dalton had been using it as cover for orchestration, deliberately creating the very desperation he then exploited. "He keeps records," Sarah said, her voice steadying as she spoke. "In his office, ledgers showing what he paid his men, what they did, which ranches they targeted. He's not even trying to hide it because he doesn't think anyone can touch him. He owns the sheriff. He owns the judge. He owns everyone who matters." "Not everyone," Ethan said quietly. "The territorial governor doesn't belong to Dalton. Neither does the Federal Marshal Service." "But we'd need proof," Martha said. "More than just Sarah's testimony, or he'll destroy her credibility and claim she's a disgruntled employee." "I can get proof," Sarah said. "I know where he keeps the ledgers. I know the combination to his safe. I could—" "No," Martha interrupted firmly. "You've done enough. You've risked enough. We're not sending you back into that house. But how else—" "We'll find another way," Ethan said. "There's always another way." They spent the rest of the day debating options, each one seeming more dangerous or impossible than the last. Sarah stayed with them, too frightened to return to town, too traumatized to be alone. Martha made up a pallet for her in the sitting room and sat with her until exhaustion finally dragged the girl into fitful sleep. That night, Martha and Ethan sat on the porch in the darkness, voices low. "We could go to the territorial capital," Martha said. "Present what we have, Sarah's testimony, the water rights documentation. It might be enough." "It won't be," Ethan replied. "Not without hard evidence. Dalton's too well connected. He'll claim Sarah's lying, and without proof to back her up, it's her word against his. We need those ledgers." "So what do we do?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We force his hand. We make him come to us. Make him act openly where witnesses can see. If he's as confident as Sarah says, he might make a mistake." "That's incredibly risky." Everything worth doing is risky, Ethan said. He reached for her hand in the darkness. But I won't ask you to do this. If you want to take Sarah and leave, go somewhere safe while I— Stop, Martha said. I'm not leaving. We're in this together, remember? Equal partners. Equal partners who might both end up dead if this goes wrong. Then we'd better make sure it doesn't go wrong. They sat in silence, hands clasped, and Martha thought about how far she'd come from that auction block in Bitter Springs. She'd been invisible then, disposable, worth less than livestock in the eyes of her own family. Now she was planning to take on the most powerful man in the county, risking everything for a principal and a home and a love she'd never expected to find. It should have terrified her. It did terrify her, but it also filled her with a fierce, bright determination that burned away the fear. The plan came together over the next few days. They would hold a public meeting at the ranch, invite all the families who'd been using the spring, and formally establish a water cooperative with documented rights and bylaws. They'd make sure word reached Dalton, make sure he knew they were organizing against him, and they'd wait to see how he'd respond. He'll come, Ethan predicted. His ego won't let him ignore a direct challenge, and when he comes, we'll have witnesses. Everyone will see what he really is. And if he brings violence, then we'll be ready. The meeting was set for the following Saturday. Martha spent the intervening days in a state of controlled anxiety, preparing food for the gathering, making sure Sarah stayed hidden, watching the road for any sign of Dalton's men. Ethan pushed himself harder in his recovery, determined to be standing on his own feet when the confrontation came. On Friday evening, Mrs. Henshaw arrived with news. "Dalton knows," she said without preamble. "The whole town knows. He's been drinking at the saloon, telling anyone who'll listen that he's going to end this farce tomorrow, that you're all trespassing on water rights that'll belong to him soon enough." "Let him come," Ethan said. "There's more," Mrs. Henshaw continued. "He's hired additional men, rough types from out of territory. Whatever he's planning, it's not going to be a polite conversation." Martha's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "Then we'll make sure there are enough witnesses that he can't afford to be too rough." Saturday dawned clear and hot. By mid-morning, wagons began arriving. The Petersons came early to help set up. The Chens brought their whole extended family. Tom Sutton arrived with several other older ranchers who'd been quietly watching the situation develop. Even families from farther out, people Martha had never met, came because word had spread that something important was happening, that someone was finally standing up to Charles Dalton. By noon, there were nearly 40 people gathered at the ranch. Martha moved among them, offering water and food, her heart hammering but her demeanor calm. Ethan stood on the porch, still leaning on one crutch but upright and resolute. They'd positioned several men around the property's perimeter, not guards exactly, but witnesses who could see anyone approaching. At noon, the lookout called out, "Riders approaching from the east." A lot of riders. Dalton came with 10 men, all armed, all wearing expressions that promised violence. They rode into the yard like an invading army, fanning out to create maximum intimidation. The families gathered in the yard drew closer together, children held tight by protective parents. Dalton himself looked furious, his cultured veneer cracked to reveal something ugly underneath. He didn't dismount, staying mounted to maintain the height advantage, to loom over everyone gathered. "This ends now," he announced, his voice carrying across the yard. "I've tolerated your interference long enough, Ward, all of you. This water belongs to whoever owns this land, and this land will be mine, one way or another." "The law says different," Ethan called back. "Water rights in this territory can be established through communal use and necessity. We've documented months of shared access to this spring. You can't simply take it." "I can do whatever I want," Dalton snarled. "You're squatting on resources you can't protect. You're organizing illegal cooperation to circumvent legitimate business, and you're harboring a thief." He pointed directly at the house, and Martha's blood ran cold. He knew Sarah was here. "That girl stole from me," Dalton continued. "Broke into my safe, took private documents. That's a crime. I want her handed over, and I want all of you to disperse. Now." "Sarah Chen is under our protection," Martha said, stepping forward. Her voice didn't shake, though her hands did. "And she didn't steal anything. She witnessed your crimes, and had the courage to speak truth. The word of a lying Chinese girl against mine? Dalton laughed, but it was an ugly sound. Good luck with that. It's not just her word, Ethan said. We have documentation. We have witnesses. We have enough to take to the territorial authorities. You have nothing, Dalton spat. And you... He turned his horse toward Martha, and she saw murder in his eyes. You especially have nothing. You're not even supposed to exist. A bought woman with no legal standing, playing at being respectable. Who's going to believe anything you say? The words were meant to wound, meant to humiliate her in front of everyone. Martha felt their impact, felt the old shame trying to rise up and choke her. But then she looked around at the faces watching her. Mrs. Henshaw's fierce approval, Anna Peterson's supportive nod, Ethan's absolute faith, and she realized something profound. These people saw her, not as something bought or disposable, but as someone who mattered, someone whose voice carried weight, someone worth standing beside. She lifted her chin and met Dalton's gaze directly. I'm going to believe what I say, she replied. And so are all these people. And so will the territorial governor when we present our evidence. You've terrorized this valley long enough, Mr. Dalton. It's over. It's over when I say it's over, Dalton roared. He gestured to his men. Burn the barn, search the house, find that girl, and I wouldn't do that if I were you. The new voice came from the edge of the yard. Everyone turned to see a man on horseback, wearing a badge that caught the sunlight. Behind him were 4 more riders, all similarly marked as law enforcement. Deputy Marshal William Crawford, the man announced. We've been investigating reports of illegal land acquisition in this county. Mr. Dalton, I'm going to need you to come with us for questioning. Dalton's face went purple with rage. On whose authority? On the authority of the United States government, Crawford replied calmly. We've received testimony from a Miss Sarah Chen, as well as documentation of your activities. That gives us plenty of cause to bring you in. That's impossible. Those documents are locked in my safe. No one could have... He stopped, realizing what he'd just admitted. Crawford smiled grimly. Thank you for confirming the existence of the evidence, Mr. Dalton. Makes our job easier. Now, you can come peacefully, or my men can help you. Your choice. For a long moment, Dalton sat frozen on his horse, calculation warring with fury in his expression. His hand moved toward his gun, and every one of the marshal's men drew their weapons in response. Don't be stupid, Crawford advised. You're already facing serious charges. Don't add assaulting a federal officer to the list. Slowly, Dalton's hand moved away from his weapon. He looked around at the gathered families, at Martha and Ethan, and his expression promised that this wasn't over, that he'd find a way to destroy them all. But when he spoke, all he said was, This is a mistake. I have lawyers. I have friends in high places. Then they can visit you in jail, Crawford said. He nodded to his men, who moved forward to flank Dalton. The rest of you, he called to Dalton's hired guns, are free to go. Leave peacefully, and you won't be charged as accessories. The hired men didn't need to be told twice. They spurred their horses and rode out, leaving Dalton isolated and exposed. As the marshal led him away, the yard erupted in cheers and tears of relief. Martha found herself surrounded by people wanting to shake her hand, to thank her, to celebrate this impossible victory. Through the crowd, she saw Ethan making his way toward her, moving without the crutch now, his face alight with joy and pride. When he reached her, he didn't say anything. He just pulled her into his arms and held her while the celebration swirled around them. Later, after the families had departed and Sarah had been safely escorted to town by the remaining deputies to give her formal statement, Martha and Ethan sat on the porch in the gathering dusk. How? Martha asked. How did the marshals know to come? Mrs. Henshaw, Ethan replied with a smile. Apparently she didn't just bring news yesterday. She brought a telegraph operator who sent word to the territorial capital about everything Sarah had told us. The marshals were already on their way before the meeting even started. That clever woman. She said she wasn't going to let another bully destroy another family if she could help it. Ethan turned to face Martha fully. This isn't over. Dalton will fight the charges. It could take months, maybe years to resolve. But the spring is safe, Martha said. The ranch is safe. That's what matters. And us? Ethan asked softly. Are we safe? Martha took his hand, lacing their fingers together. We're more than safe. We're together. We're building something real and lasting. And she paused, gathering her courage. And when you're ready, when your leg is healed and you can stand without pain, I'd like very much to become your wife. Properly. With vows and promises and a future that belongs to both of us. Ethan's smile was radiant. I was going to ask you. I had a whole speech planned. Ask me anyway, Martha said. He stood, wavering slightly but staying upright on his own. Then he dropped to one knee with a grimace of pain and determination that made Martha's heart clench. Martha Cole, he said, you've saved my life, my home, and my heart. You've shown me that broken things can be made whole, that hope exists even in drought, that love is possible even after loss. Will you marry me? Yes, Martha said through tears. Yes, absolutely yes. He stood with her help and kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled, the first suggestion of rain in 3 long years. The drought wasn't over yet. Dalton's defeat wasn't final yet. There were still battles ahead, still challenges to face. But standing there in Ethan's arms, Martha felt something she'd lost so long ago, she'd forgotten its shape. Certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, with exactly the person she was meant to love. She'd started this journey on an auction block, disposable and discarded. Now she stood on her own land, respected and loved, with a future spreading out before her like an answered prayer. The transformation was complete. Martha Cole had finally come home. The rain came 3 days later. Not the gentle mist that teases and disappoints, but real rain. Heavy drops that drummed on the roof and turned the dusty yard to mud and filled the air with the smell of earth, remembering what it was meant to be. Martha stood on the porch, watching it fall, her hand resting unconsciously on her stomach, tears streaming down her face to mingle with the rain that blew sideways onto the covered boards. Ethan found her there and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. It's really happening, he murmured. Everything's happening, Martha replied, and there was wonder in her voice. The rain fell for 2 days straight, filling the cistern behind the barn, swelling the dry creek beds, soaking into soil that had been parched for so long it had forgotten how to drink. When it finally stopped, the world looked different, greener somehow, even though nothing had grown yet. Just the promise of green, the potential of it, was enough to transform everything. The week after the rain, Martha and Ethan rode into Bitter Springs together. Ethan's leg was healing well enough that he could manage the wagon, though he still favored it when walking. They had business to attend to, legal papers to file establishing the water cooperative, supplies to purchase for the ranch's revival, and a wedding to plan. The town was different too, or perhaps Martha was seeing it differently now. People who'd ignored her on that terrible auction day now nodded in greeting. Several stopped to congratulate them on Dalton's arrest, to thank them for standing firm, to ask about joining the water cooperative. Martha received their gratitude with grace, though it still felt strange to be seen, to matter, to have her choices affect the lives of others. They stopped at Mrs. Henshaw's boarding house first. The older woman embraced Martha with fierce affection. "You did well, girl," she said. "Better than well. You did right." "We couldn't have done it without you," Martha replied. "The telegraph, the marshals. I just made sure the right people knew what was happening. You're the ones who stood up when it counted." Mrs. Henshaw released her and turned to Ethan. "You're a lucky man, Ethan Ward." "I know," he said simply. "When's the wedding?" 2 weeks, Martha said. "We wanted to wait until Ethan could stand through the ceremony without falling over." "I'm much better now," Ethan protested, though the smile tugging at his lips said he didn't mind the teasing. Mrs. Henshaw clapped her hands together. "Then we'll do it properly. Church ceremony, community celebration. This town needs something good to celebrate after all the misery Dalton put us through." "We were planning something simple," Martha began, but Mrs. Henshaw waved this away. "Nonsense. You two saved this valley. The least we can do is give you a proper wedding." Over the next 2 weeks, the entire community seemed to take the wedding as a personal project. Anna Peterson and the other ranch wives organized a quilting bee to make Martha a wedding quilt. Tom Sutton and the men began building an arbor in the churchyard for the ceremony. Mrs. Henshaw coordinated food contributions, threatening anyone who suggested bringing anything less than their best. Sarah Chen, who'd been staying with the Petersons since giving her testimony to the marshals, appeared at the ranch one afternoon with a length of beautiful cream-colored silk. "It was my mother's," she said shyly. "She brought it from China when she came here as a bride. I thought, if you wanted, it would make a beautiful dress." Martha's hands trembled as she touched the fabric. "Sarah, I can't accept this. It's too precious." "Please," Sarah said. "You protected me when I had nowhere to go. You stood up for me when Dalton tried to destroy my credibility. Let me give you this. Let me be part of your joy." So Martha accepted, and over the following days, with Anna Peterson's skilled help, the silk became a dress, simple in design but elegant, with long sleeves and a high collar that suited Martha's age and dignity. When she tried it on for the first time, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. "You're beautiful," Anna said softly. "I'm 55 years old with gray hair and work-worn hands," Martha replied, but without bitterness. Just truth. "You're beautiful," Anna repeated firmly, "and Ethan knows it, which is what matters." The legal proceedings against Dalton moved faster than anyone expected. The ledgers Sarah had described were found exactly where she'd said they'd be, and they documented years of systematic fraud, intimidation, and outright crime. Dalton's lawyers tried every trick they knew, but the evidence was overwhelming. 2 weeks after his arrest, Charles Dalton was formally charged with multiple counts of fraud, arson, and conspiracy. His holdings were frozen pending the outcome of the trial. More importantly for the Valley, the water rights question was settled. The territorial court recognized the cooperative's claim, establishing legal protection for shared access to the spring. Dalton's attempt to monopolize water resources had failed completely. "It's over," Ethan said when the news reached them. "It's really over." "For now," Martha said, ever practical, "there will be other Daltons, other men who think power gives them the right to take what they want. But they'll find a valley that knows how to stand together now. That's your legacy, Martha. You taught us how to fight." "We taught each other," she corrected gently. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, with just enough breeze to keep the September heat bearable. Martha woke in her room. She'd insisted on observing the tradition of not seeing Ethan before the ceremony, though it meant sleeping alone for the first time in weeks. She dressed slowly, savoring each moment, running her hands over the silk dress, pinning her silver-streaked hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she finally looked at herself in the small mirror, she saw not the worn-out woman who'd stood on an auction block 4 months ago, but someone transformed. Not younger, she'd never wanted to pretend to be younger, but vital, purposeful, loved. Mrs. Henshaw arrived to escort her to town. "You ready?" she asked. "More than ready," Martha replied. The church was packed. It seemed like everyone in the valley had come, drawn by curiosity or genuine affection, or simply the need to witness something good after so much hardship. Martha walked down the aisle on Mrs. Henshaw's arm, and she felt the weight of all those eyes on her, but it didn't shame her anymore. Let them look. Let them see what a woman could become when someone finally saw her worth. Ethan waited at the altar, dressed in a new suit that Mrs. Henshaw had somehow convinced him to buy. His leg was still splinted, but he stood straight and strong, and when Martha met his eyes, she saw everything she needed to know reflected there. Love, respect, partnership, promise. The ceremony was conducted by the circuit preacher who passed through Bitter Springs once a month. He kept it simple and heartfelt, speaking about second chances and the courage it took to build new lives from broken pieces. When he asked if anyone objected to the union, Martha held her breath, half expecting Thomas or Eleanor to stand and protest. But there was only supportive silence, and then Ethan was taking her hands and speaking his vows. "Martha, when I found you on that platform, I thought I was saving you, but you saved me. You brought life back to my home, hope back to my heart, and purpose back to my days. You showed me that love doesn't have an age limit, that partnership has no expiration date, that broken things can be made whole if you're brave enough to try. I promise to honor you, respect you, stand beside you through whatever comes, not as your rescuer or your owner, but as your equal and your partner in all things." Martha's voice shook as she replied, "Ethan, you offered me something I thought I'd lost forever, choice, the ability to decide my own path. to claim my own worth, to build my own future. You saw me when I was invisible, valued me when I was disposable, and loved me when I'd forgotten how to love myself. I promise to walk beside you, to share your burdens and your joys, to be your partner in building a life that honors both of us, not because I owe you, but because I choose you every day for all the days we have." The preacher pronounced them married, and when Ethan kissed her, the church erupted in applause and cheers. Martha tasted salt, her tears or his, she couldn't tell, and felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. She wasn't Martha Cole anymore. She was Martha Ward, and the name felt like coming home. The celebration afterward was unlike anything Martha had experienced. Tables had been set up in the churchyard, groaning under the weight of contributed dishes. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing. Children ran wild with joy. The men toasted Ethan's good fortune, and the women embraced Martha with genuine warmth. At one point, Thomas and Eleanor appeared at the edge of the gathering. Martha saw them before they saw her, watched as they took in the celebration, the community's support, the obvious happiness. Eleanor's face was pinched with something that looked like envy. Thomas just looked uncomfortable. They didn't approach, and Martha didn't seek them out. There was nothing to say to them anymore. They'd thrown her away, and she'd built something better from the ruins they'd left her with. Let them see it. Let them understand exactly what they'd discarded. As the sun set and the celebration showed no signs of ending, Ethan pulled Martha aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Ward?" The name still made her smile. "More than ready." They said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon. The ride back to the ranch took them through the valley as dusk settled, painting everything in shades of gold and purple. The rain had transformed the landscape. Grass was already sprouting green, wildflowers were beginning to bloom, the air smelled of growth and possibility. "Happy?" Ethan asked as they crested the rise that brought the ranch into view. "Beyond words," Martha replied. The ranch looked different in the fading light, or perhaps Martha was seeing it differently. Not as a struggling place barely holding on, but as a home, their home, built on partnership and respect and love. The barn had been repaired. The fences were sound. The garden was thriving. And inside the house, two lives were being woven together into something stronger than either alone. That night, lying in Ethan's arms in the bed they now shared, Martha allowed herself to think about the future. Not just the immediate future of harvests and water shares and the ongoing legal proceedings against Dalton, but the distant future. Years stretching ahead, filled with work and purpose and love. "What are you thinking?" Ethan murmured against her hair. "That I'm happy," Martha said. "That I didn't think I'd ever be happy again, and now I am. That feels like a miracle." "You're the miracle," Ethan said. "Everything else is just details." Autumn came, painting the hills in shades of amber and rust. The water cooperative's first official meeting was held at the ranch, with representatives from 7 families gathered around Martha's kitchen table to establish bylaws and procedures. Martha took notes while Ethan moderated, and she felt a deep satisfaction watching these people work together, knowing she'd helped make this possible. The cooperative wasn't perfect. There were disputes about water allocation, debates about expansion, disagreements about fees, but it was functional, democratic, and most importantly, it worked. The families had water, their cattle survived, their gardens grew. And Dalton, still in jail awaiting trial, couldn't touch any of it. Winter arrived gently, bringing soft rains instead of snow to the valley. The ranch settled into quieter rhythms. Ethan's leg healed completely, leaving only a slight limp when he was tired. Martha's garden slept beneath mulch, waiting for spring. They spent evenings by the fire, planning improvements for when the weather warmed, dreaming about expansion and growth. One evening in late January, as they sat together reviewing the cooperative's accounts, Martha set down her pen and turned to Ethan with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I need to tell you something," she said. Concern flashed across his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's—" She paused, searching for words. "Everything's impossibly, unexpectedly right. Ethan, I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan stared at her, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally, dawning wonder. "That's not possible," he said. You said you were past. I know what I said. I was wrong. Martha laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. I'm 55 years old, Ethan. This shouldn't be happening, but it is. I've missed 2 cycles, and this morning I was sick, and she pressed her hands to her stomach. There's a baby, our baby. Ethan crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt beside her chair, his hands covering hers on her stomach. Are you sure? As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it. Then we'll go to the doctor tomorrow. He stopped, his eyes searching her face. Are you happy about this? Or scared? Or both, Martha admitted. I'm terrified. Women my age don't have babies for good reasons. The risks are… She swallowed hard. But I'm also happier than I have any right to be. I never thought I'd be a mother. I raised Thomas and his siblings, but they were never mine, not really. Her voice broke. This is mine. Ours. A life we created together. We'll get through it, Ethan said fiercely. Whatever comes, whatever risks, we'll face them together. And in 6 months or so… A smile broke across his face, transforming it with joy. In 6 months, there's going to be a baby in this house, a new life, a new beginning. They went to the doctor the next day. Dr. Harrison, who'd been practicing in Bitter Springs for 30 years, examined Martha with professional thoroughness, then sat back with an expression of cautious optimism. You are indeed pregnant, Mrs. Ward. About 10 weeks along, I'd estimate. And before you ask about the risks at your age, yes, they're real. But you're healthy, strong, and clearly well-nourished. I've seen women your age carry to term successfully. It's rare, but not impossible. What do we need to do? Ethan asked. Take care of her, Dr. Harrison said simply. Good food, adequate rest, no excessive strain. I'll want to see her monthly as the pregnancy progresses. And Mrs. Ward, he looked at her seriously. You'll need to listen to your body. If something feels wrong, don't hesitate. Come immediately. I will, Martha promised. Word of the pregnancy spread through the valley like wildfire. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Women who'd known Martha for only a few months suddenly became fiercely protective, offering advice and support, and hand-sewn baby clothes. Mrs. Henshaw appointed herself Martha's unofficial guardian, showing up weekly to check on her and lecture about proper prenatal care. At your age, you need to be careful, she'd say, wagging her finger. Then she'd add more softly, but if anyone can do this, it's you. You're stronger than you know. As winter gave way to spring, Martha's body changed in ways that amazed and terrified her. Her belly swelled with undeniable life. She felt movement, flutters at first, then definite kicks that made her gasp with wonder. The garden work became more difficult, so Ethan and several neighboring women took over most of the physical labor, though Martha still directed operations from a chair in the shade. The pregnancy wasn't easy. There were days of exhaustion so profound she could barely move. Nights when her back ached so badly she couldn't sleep. Moments of fear when she felt the baby go still and was certain something terrible had happened, only to feel movement resume and know the panic had been for nothing. But there were also moments of transcendent joy. Ethan's hands on her belly, feeling his child kick for the first time, his face transformed with wonder. The day Anna Peterson presented her with the most beautiful cradle Martha had ever seen, hand-carved by James and finished smooth as silk. The moment when Ethan whispered to her stomach, I'm your father, and I already love you more than I knew was possible. In April, as spring transformed the valley into something lush and green, the trial of Charles Dalton concluded. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Dalton was sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison, and his assets were ordered liquidated to compensate his victims. The news reached the ranch on a warm afternoon when Martha was sitting on the porch, her hands resting on her very pregnant belly. Ethan had ridden to town for supplies and returned with the verdict. When he told her, Martha felt something she'd been carrying for months finally release. It's really over, she said. It's really over, Ethan confirmed. He sat beside her and took her hand. The ranch is safe. The water is protected. Dalton can't hurt anyone anymore. Good, Martha said simply. That night, she went into labor. It started gradually, a tightening across her belly that came and went, easily dismissed at first as the false labor Dr. Harrison had warned her about. But as the hours passed, the contractions grew stronger, more regular, undeniable. Ethan sent for the doctor and Mrs. Henshaw, while Martha paced the bedroom, breathing through the pain, counting the minutes between contractions. Anna Peterson arrived, then Sarah Chen, and soon the house was filled with women who'd come to support her through this final trial. The labor was long and difficult. Martha had expected nothing less. Her body was old for this work, unpracticed, reluctant. There were hours when she was certain she wouldn't survive it, when the pain was so consuming she couldn't remember why she'd ever wanted this, why she'd thought she could do it. But every time she faltered, there were voices encouraging her, hands supporting her, reminders that she'd survived harder things than this. And through it all, Ethan waited just outside the door, pacing and praying and waiting to meet their child. Dawn was breaking when Martha finally pushed her daughter into the world. The baby's cry was strong and healthy, the most beautiful sound Martha had ever heard. Dr. Harrison cleaned and checked the infant, then placed her on Martha's chest. This tiny, perfect creature with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked magnificently. "She's perfect," the doctor pronounced. 10 fingers, 10 toes, healthy as can be. Ethan was allowed in then, and he stood at the bedside, staring at his daughter with an expression of absolute awe. "She's real," he whispered. "She's real," Martha confirmed, laughing through exhausted tears. They named her Grace Eleanor Ward. Grace for the daughter Ethan had lost, Eleanor because Martha wanted to reclaim the name from her nephew's awful wife and fill it with something good. Little Grace nursed hungrily, her tiny fist curled around Martha's finger, and Martha felt her heart expand to accommodate this new love that was somehow infinite and specific all at once. Over the following weeks, the ranch transformed into something it had never been, a place of new life and new beginnings. Grace proved to be a healthy, vigorous baby who slept well and ate enthusiastically. Martha recovered with surprising speed, her body apparently tougher than anyone had given it credit for. The Valley celebrated Grace's arrival with the same enthusiasm they'd shown for Martha and Ethan's wedding. Gifts poured in, clothes, blankets, toys carved from wood, offers of help and support. Sarah Chen came weekly to help with household tasks, refusing any payment, saying only that she wanted to give back what had been given to her. One afternoon in June, when Grace was 6 weeks old, Martha was sitting on the porch nursing her daughter when she saw a familiar wagon approaching. Her heart sank as she recognized it. Thomas and Eleanor, come at last to see what they'd thrown away. They climbed down from their wagon, Eleanor's face carefully neutral, Thomas looking deeply uncomfortable. Martha didn't stand to greet them. She just waited, Grace in her arms, for them to approach. "Aunt Martha," Thomas began, his voice uncertain. "We heard about the baby. We wanted to—" "What did you want, Thomas?" Martha's voice was calm, almost pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Eleanor stepped forward. "We wanted to see if you needed anything, to offer our congratulations." "And to be forgiven?" Martha asked. The directness of the question seemed to startle them both. Eleanor recovered first. "We did what we thought was best at the time, the drought, the expense—" "You put me on an auction block and tried to sell me," Martha interrupted quietly. "Don't pretend it was about economics. It was about convenience. I became inconvenient, so you discarded me." "We gave you 30 years, Thomas protested weakly. "You took 30 years, Martha corrected. "Years of my labor, my care, my life. And when you'd used up what you wanted from me, you threw me away like garbage." Grace stirred and whimpered. Martha adjusted her, the movement automatic and tender, and saw Eleanor's eyes track the gesture with something that might have been envy. "Look at you," Eleanor said, and there was bitterness in her voice now. "You land on your feet. You marry well. You have a child at your age when I've been trying for years with nothing to show for it. How is that fair?" The honesty of it surprised Martha. For just a moment, she felt a flash of pity for this woman who'd defined herself by what she didn't have, who'd torn others down because she couldn't build herself up. But the pity didn't erase what they'd done. It didn't undo the humiliation or the cruelty or the casual dismissal of Martha's humanity. "I didn't land on my feet," Martha said quietly. "I fought for my feet. I built this life from nothing because someone finally gave me a chance to do it. And yes, I have a daughter at an age when it shouldn't be possible, but that's not unfair to you, Eleanor. It's just life, unpredictable and sometimes miraculous. You want fairness? Try treating people with dignity. Try seeing their worth beyond what they can do for you. Thomas and Eleanor stood silent, the weight of Martha's words settling over them like a judgment. I don't forgive you, Martha continued. Maybe someday I will, but not today. Not when the memory of that auction block is still so fresh. Not when I remember how it felt to be valued less than livestock by my own family. So if you came here looking for absolution, you won't find it. But if you came out of genuine care, if you want to know that I'm happy and healthy and thriving despite what you did, then yes, I am. All of those things. She looked down at Grace, who'd fallen back to sleep at her breast. And I have everything I need right here. Thomas and Eleanor left without another word. Martha watched them go and felt not triumph, but a quiet, settled peace. She'd said what needed saying, claimed her truth, set her boundaries. Whether they heard it or not was their problem, not hers. Ethan emerged from the barn where he'd been watching but not interfering. He sat beside Martha and looked at their sleeping daughter. You handled that well, he said. I said what was true. That's all. That's everything, Ethan replied. As summer deepened and Grace grew, the ranch prospered in ways neither Martha nor Ethan had dared imagine a year ago. The garden produced abundantly. The cattle herd expanded. The water cooperative thrived, with 2 more families joining and contributing to the maintenance and expansion of the irrigation system. Martha discovered that motherhood at 55 was both harder and more rewarding than she'd anticipated. The physical demands were real. She tired more easily than a younger woman would, needed more rest, moved more carefully. But the emotional rewards were profound. Every smile, every milestone, every moment of Grace's development felt precious in a way Martha suspected younger mothers might take for granted. I don't have decades with her, she confided to Mrs. Henshaw one afternoon. Even if I'm blessed with a long life, she'll lose her mother younger than most. That breaks my heart. Then fill the years you have with love, Mrs. Henshaw advised. Make them count. That's all any of us can do, really. Make the time we have count. The first anniversary of Martha and Ethan's wedding arrived in September. They celebrated quietly, just the 2 of them and Grace, with a simple dinner and the exchange of small gifts. Ethan gave Martha a locket with Grace's picture inside. Martha gave Ethan a journal she'd been keeping since the day they met, documenting their journey from that auction block to this moment of quiet domesticity. So she'll know, Martha explained. So Grace will know where she came from, what her parents survived to create her. Ethan read the first entry, his eyes growing bright with emotion. You've given me everything, he said. A home, a family, a purpose. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You saw me, Martha replied simply. When I was invisible to everyone else, you saw me. That's all it took. As Grace approached her first birthday, preparations began for another celebration. The whole valley planned to attend, treating it as an excuse to gather and rejoice in the continuing defeat of Dalton's shadow over their lives. The morning of Grace's birthday dawned clear and perfect. Martha dressed her daughter in a white dress that Anna Peterson had sewn, with tiny embroidered flowers along the hem. Grace laughed and grabbed at everything within reach, her personality already emerging, curious, determined, fearless. The celebration was everything Martha had dreamed of and more. Tables groaned under contributed dishes. Children played while adults talked and laughed. Grace was passed from lap to lap, admired and cooed over and spoiled thoroughly. Someone had even baked a cake, and though Grace was more interested in smashing it than eating it, the joy on her messy face was worth any amount of cleaning. As the afternoon sun slanted golden across the yard, Martha found herself standing slightly apart from the celebration, holding Grace on her hip, just watching. All these people gathered to celebrate life and love and survival. All this community built on foundations of mutual support and respect. Mrs. Henshaw joined her, following her gaze. You did this, the older woman said. All of this. The cooperative, the community standing together, the hope. You made this possible. We made it possible, Martha corrected. All of us together. Maybe. But you were the catalyst. You were the one who refused to accept that being discarded meant being finished. Mrs. Henshaw squeezed Martha's arm. "You should be proud." Martha looked down at Grace, who'd fallen asleep against her shoulder despite the noise and activity. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the humiliation, the pain, the fear, the choice she'd made to trust a stranger, the work she'd poured into building a life from ruins, the love she'd found when she'd stopped believing love was possible. "I am proud," she said softly. "For the first time in my life, I'm proud of who I am and what I've built. That's worth everything." As the sun set and the celebration wound down, families began departing with warm farewells and promises to see each other at the next cooperative meeting. Ethan and Martha stood on their porch, Grace between them, waving goodbye. When the last wagon disappeared down the road, Ethan turned to Martha and smiled. "Ready to go inside, Mrs. Ward?" "In a minute," Martha said. She wanted to stand here just a little longer, holding her daughter, beside her husband, looking out over land she'd helped save and a community she'd helped build. The ranch spread before them in the gathering dusk, whole and healed, thriving and productive. The barn stood straight and sound. The garden beds waited for next season's planting. The creek ran clear with water that would never again be controlled by one man's greed. And inside the house, a cradle waited for a sleeping child. A future waited to be written. A life waited to be lived. Martha Cole had started this journey as someone the world had decided was worthless. Too old, too used up, too disposable to matter. But she'd refused to accept that verdict. She'd chosen herself when no one else would. She'd built a life of purpose and meaning and love from the ashes of rejection. Now she stood as Martha Ward, wife, mother, partner, leader, respected and valued and essential to a community that had learned from her example. She was living proof that purpose doesn't expire with age, that love has no timeline, that new beginnings can happen at any moment if you're brave enough to choose them. She'd been bought for $50 and saved from humiliation. But the real salvation had come from within, from her own strength, her own courage, her own refusal to be defined by other people's limitations. Grace stirred against her shoulder, making small sleeping sounds. Ethan wrapped his arm around both of them, and together they stood in the doorway of their home, watching the stars emerge. "Thank you," Martha whispered. "For what?" Ethan asked. "For seeing me, for choosing me, for giving me the chance to become who I was always meant to be." "Thank you for taking that chance," Ethan replied. "For being brave enough to trust, for showing me that broken doesn't mean beyond repair." They went inside together, closing the door on the cooling night air. Inside, the house was warm with lamplight and the smell of home. Grace went into her cradle without waking, one small fist curled near her face. Martha stood looking down at her daughter, this impossible gift, this proof that miracles still happened. Tomorrow there would be work, there was always work. The ranch to run, the cooperative to manage, a child to raise, a marriage to nurture. But tonight, Martha allowed herself to simply rest in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do, with exactly the people she was meant to love. She'd been thrown away like garbage and had become essential. She'd been told she was worthless and had proven her value beyond measure. She'd been invisible and had become unforgettable. Her story wasn't one of rescue, though that's how it had started. It was a story of choice, the choice to see herself as worthy even when the world said she wasn't. The choice to fight for dignity when it would have been easier to surrender. The choice to love and be loved when she'd forgotten how. And now, at 56 years old, with silver in her hair and a baby in her arms and a partner at her side, Martha Ward stood as living testimony to a simple truth. You're never too old, too broken, or too far gone to reclaim your life and write a different ending. The lamp burned low. Ethan's hand found hers in the darkness. Grace slept peacefully, secure in the home her parents had built from hope and determination and love. And outside, the rain-blessed land settled into night, holding within its soil the promise of another spring, another harvest, another chance for things to grow. Martha closed her eyes and let herself believe in tomorrow, in all the tomorrows yet to come, in the beautiful, improbable, hard-won life she'd created from the moment she chose to step down from that auction block and trust in possibility. She was home. She was loved. She was enough. And that, finally and forever, was everything.